Right back at you with your eyes and ears don't lie. And it's been a crazy week. I know it's been some time because my daughter just finished her freshman year. We've been busy getting summer started off. But I'm back at you and I'm going to talk about a lot of the craziness that's been going on this week. And there's been a lot. And starting with, there's been a lot of anger and frustration over what's been going on as far as immigration enforcement and things. And I think one of the misconceptions that a lot of people have right now is that, especially when you start looking at the right-leaning Trump supporting maggots, I think overall the general public is not against the enforcement of immigration. It's how you're going about the enforcement of immigration, where we know that you are selectively enforcing the laws because you're acting as though there's not any other illegals that aren't Hispanic and Latino. You're not going after none of them when there's a lot of Europeans in this country illegally. There's a lot of Asians in the country illegally, but you're targeting the group that you're targeting because of the color of their skin. And that's obvious by the way you're handling stuff. Yes, you hear the argument that, well, you committed a crime. Yes, that's undeniable that entering into the country illegally is a crime. It's a civil crime, though. It's like jaywalking and all that until the moment that you are removed and deported. Then if you come back again, then it becomes a felony. So I'm not arguing that. I don't think a lot of people are arguing that. It's the way you're going about it, where you're just rounding people up overwhelmingly just based on their race and how their appearance is. You're not going about having the majority of existing warrants out for people and going to look for them specifically. You're going out and you're looking for anyone who fits the visual description. And unfortunately, you're going to the communities that these people live in. You're going to locations where you know that their labor is being exploited. You're going to construction sites where you arrest tons of workers, but you ain't walking out the foreman. You ain't taking out the owner of the construction company who's exploiting this cheap labor because they don't want to pay a fair rate. They don't want to pay benefits. So I'm not giving them a pass on entering the country illegally, but where's the accountability for those that are committing employment fraud, filling out faulty I-9s? So that way you can take taxes out of their payroll to keep the federal government happy. It doesn't ask what your status is to the employee, but it does ask the employer, are you legally able to work in the country? So every single one of you business owners that are filling out I-9s for your employees, you're lying and committing fraud. But you're not seeing none of them get arrested. I watched recently this week where there was a construction site where they had probably 40 to 50 workers zip tied and lined up, getting ready, to do their thing with ICE. And it is what it is, where if you went about that equally and fairly, I won't have a problem with it. But we know that's not what's happening. Because at the end of the day, you unfortunately are illegal. And I'm hearing people's arguments of you've built a life here over the last 20 or 30 years. Wrong is wrong, right is right. But the caveat that I have that I'm torn by too is I believe in law, but I also believe in fairness. And when COVID came around, you declared all these agricultural workers essential workers. So they were essential workers where they got to keep working, knowing their status. This was during the Trump administration. You got to keep working to feed America, because that's what they're doing. They're feeding America. You're building America. I got a buddy in Texas who I have to really research the numbers, but I've heard similar numbers from different people that actually live in Texas and are from Texas. And they're telling me that 60 to 75% of the construction workers in Texas are legal immigrants. And they're not hiring themselves. We know that overwhelmingly, the vast majority of employees that work on all these agricultural farms throughout the country are immigrants, and most of them have illegal status. And you're seeing that now with all of these farms going under, and on TikTok and Facebook and Instagram and all these social media outlets crying about how your workers ain't showing up. But you've been exploiting them for years, decades. I listened to a farmer complaining about it where he says he pays these guys $10 an hour, or essentially $100 a day. Now, yes, you're getting paid $100 a day. He's probably filling out fake I-9s. I don't know about him specifically, but the majority of them are, because you get federal money for your farms. So you want the federal government to be happy and get their money from their payroll. So you're paying these guys $100 a day, and then you're essentially not giving any benefits or any kind of health care of any kind or anything. And wonder why you can't fill these jobs with regular American people. First off, they ain't built like that no more. You're not getting us to come out there and work your farms. You built this country on the backs of free labor with us anyway for its entirety. Slaves built this country. Slaves built the White House. Slave money is behind a lot of this non-tech money that's created these oligarchs. This generational family money that's been getting passed down. Since 75% of the wealthy people in this country, it's inherited money that's been passed down. And the other 25% is broken up into tech entrepreneurs, businessmen, hedge funds, stocks, and a variety of other things where you made your money. But that 75% of generational wealth that's being passed down, you could trace that back to slave money. Because y'all made all y'all money in slave money, and then when that ran its course, you switched it over into railroads, textiles, and other endeavors, but foundationally, your money came from slavery. When you look at these good old boy families and all that, that's what it came from. Slavery and free labor. So you ain't never wanted to pay people for doing the work. When you couldn't force them no more to do it by violence and oppression, you had to look for other ways. And that's when you started employing migrants, both legal and illegal. This ain't something that just started from Biden. This didn't just start over the last decade or two. This has been an increasing issue for the longest. I remember in the 80s with longshoremen and people that worked on the docks talking about they losing their jobs to cheaper labor because foreigners were coming in and taking it. So it's the capitalistic attitude and ideology that businesses are greedy. That's what it's boiled down to. You want cheaper labor so you can make more money. So you're willing to do what's necessary to do that. You can't get Americans to do the job for the money you're paying. If you paid more money, I don't know that you'd have that same issue in certain areas, because there used to be construction work that was being done by a variety of people, ethnicities, because you paid well. And you decided, man, if I can get this cheap labor, I'm going to take advantage of it. That's going to increase my bottom line. That's going to make me more profitable. If I happen to have shareholders, that's going to make them more money. But ultimately, I'm going to pocket more money if I can cut my labor cost. So I'm willing to do whatever I need to do that, regardless of the legalities that are associated with that. But now you're seeing the impact of when you're going out and you're taking all these workers. And granted, you still can fall back on, well, you did something illegal. Yes, you did. But also, you're contributing to the country in a manner that nobody else is doing, nor do they want to. So if these are actual criminals that committed additional crime other than entering in the country illegally, I'm all for round them all up, get them out of here. You don't need violent criminals in the country. And too bad we can't deport some of these Americans that are here. But violence is, don't matter who's committing it. But we all know that you can't deport a U.S. citizen. But if you are in this country illegally and you've committed violent crimes or you've committed criminal offenses, you got no defense. The defense is, why aren't you going after everybody, and why are you picking these blue states? I'm in California, born and raised in Southern California my whole life. So I never looked at the immigrant community any different than just regular people, because I've always grown up around them. come from a military family here in San Diego, so it's never been different. I've always lived around a melting pot of people, so it never was a big deal. Nobody ever felt like they were taking jobs that I wanted or that anybody I knew wanted. I ain't never heard nobody tell me they longed to be a landscaper or work in agriculture or work in construction and do that hard manual labor all day. But the frustrating part about it is you got ICE, you got Homeland Security, you got Border Patrol involved, you got these troops that are illegally deployed on the city streets, and through all that, you also have the federal government that deputized these bounty hunters and all these Ned the retards that just want to go out there and feel special and be empowered. In addition to you offering $1,000 per migrant. That's horrible. You offering $1,000 per migrant for these human repo agents now that you've turned them into with these bounty hunters and everything. And they're out there concealing their identities. There's been rumors of people that are not even law enforcement that are out here, disappearing people. And, unfortunately, the way that the federal government is set up, you don't have to identify yourself as a federal agent. You don't have to identify yourself. I'll read you the law that, the issue that we're looking at right now is that there's been instances of individuals, including those from Homeland Security or ICE, allegedly conducting immigration enforcement activities without proper identification and sometimes concealing their faces. And this has led to community fear and concerns about impersonation and lack of accountability, which is absolutely true. Where Trump said you should prosecute everybody who, if they're a protester or somebody, even if they're not committing crimes, but if you just are out there protesting, exercising your right to the First Amendment, they should all be arrested if they're wearing masks. They arrested a gentleman a couple weeks back because he was handing out masks to protesters. That was the only thing he had done. He wasn't committing violence, he wasn't encouraging violence, but he was providing masks. And he was arrested. They brought the FBI to his house and all of this. You brought basically SWAT in. So you brought Homeland Security SWAT to this man's house with the feds, and you came 10 or 12 deep, dressed in full military garb, automatic weapons, bulletproof vests, body armor, ready to crash his door down with a battering ram because he was handing out masks. But yet you got these agents, if some of them are even agents, that are in full garb. You over here looking like you on Ninja Gaiden from Nintendo back in the old days, where they can't see none of your face. When you see their chest, there ain't no identifying name plaques or anything on there. Nothing. So that's terrible, and that's why they're trying to create certain laws where they're trying to pass the No Vigilantes Act, SB 805, which aims to require all law enforcement, including federal agents, to display identification, name, or badge numbers during enforcement actions. And that would help distinguish legitimate law enforcement from those impersonating them, because there are a lot of imposters. They don't have anything identifying on their vehicles, and you're just running up on people. And I was always taught, if I'm in the car, you're not pulling me over in a unmarked vehicle or anything in a dark place. I'm gonna go to a safe, well-lit place if I see the sirens, and I'm gonna pull over. But if you roll up to me with no identification or anything like that, my window ain't rolling down. I'm gonna need you to identify yourself, because there are dangerous people out there even wearing the uniform. So to be coming out there, since California is not a stop and identify state, and that goes both ways, where they're not required to identify themselves. But in California, if you're wearing a uniform in most municipalities and all that, and in the state, if you're a police officer wearing a uniform, it requires you have a name tag, badge number, and oftentimes they have business cards to give out when they interact with the public. But there's sketchy rules about that county to county. And the federal, there's no requirements. The caveat is they say that we would like our agents to do that, but there's no requirement. So what they're doing, if these are legitimate federal agents and people that have been deputized, you don't have to show your identity. So that's something that people need to know out there as they're arguing that, is that if they're legitimate and they're actual federal agents, or deputized by the federal government, they don't have to show that. It's bogus, but they're not required to do that. And people that are out there, you trying to run up on these federal agents and stop them from doing what they're doing, that's a bad look. Because what you're doing is you're allowing them to possibly harm you, or at least spread the narrative that this is why we need the military there, because look at what these people are doing. And I encourage people out there, man, you got to know what your rights are, and you got to not put yourself in a situation where you could possibly be harmed. And you don't want to give the other side ammo to say, see, I told you so. We have to do this because look at how they're behaving. So we don't both get to walk the same line. We know that. But, with all fairness, there are some ridiculous ideas that I'm hearing recently, where I just saw it a couple days ago, where they're trying to get the city attorneys and the local government to create a memorandum on rent protection. So you want to cover everybody's rent or make it illegal to evict anyone who is unfortunately in this country illegally detained by ICE and their family can't pay the bills anymore. You want to make it illegal to evict them. That's such a frustrating situation, because what's going on is sad, but where's the accountability and responsibility for the individuals that you did enter the country illegally? A lot of the people, you didn't commit a violent crime since you've been here, but some of them have went before the courts and you lost. They issued an order of removal, you never left. Because you're in California and there's other stuff going on, and nationwide, because there's a lot of people that have removal orders that continue to live their life every day. They got jobs, they've been living in this country, paying their taxes, contributing to society, because that's a lie when you told everybody they don't pay taxes, because they do. There's estimates that they pay upwards of $78 billion in taxes into the U.S. government that they can never access any benefits from. But you've been in this country for decades, and it's caught up with you now because they're enforcing it. And they're targeting the individuals they want, because California has the largest illegal immigrant population. But number 2 is Texas, and 3 is Florida. But you ain't seeing all of these things that you're seeing on the news going on in Texas or Florida, because they are MAGA states. So they're just as bad, but they're about the exploitation in 2. You're going to listen to Trump, who hires illegals. That's how you made your money. Illegals were working at Mar-a-Lago. They were working at all your casinos, all your hospitality places and golf courses. You look at Kid Rock, the greasy Kid Rock. You out here on your soapbox talking about illegal immigration, how they need to be gone. But then you hiring nothing but illegals in your restaurants in Nashville, because management had to come in and tell everybody who don't got their papers to leave, because ICE is planning a raid. So all of these guys that are at the forefront of this maggot nonsense, you have been using and exploiting this slave labor. And all these people that are out there complaining now about the removal of the people, it's not because of the inhumane way that they're doing it. It's the fact that it's affecting your bottom line now. So people have to understand that. These farmers, y'all voted for this man 3 times. First time around, 100,000 farmers lost their farms. There were almost $30 billion in money and subsidies given to these farmers that were able to maintain their stuff as far as a bailout. So they want to talk about the Democrats. You want to talk about wasteful money and all that. You created the problem with your bogus tariffs, and created the problem with agriculture where nobody was buying soybeans, and crippled all these farmers with your policies the first time around. But ain't nobody talking about the almost $30 billion of taxpayer money you gave specifically to farmers that you chose to. You didn't give minority farmers nothing because you didn't care if they lost their farms. And that's why you're not seeing minority farmers saying anything on social media, because they never got help from the government. So this is business as usual right now. It's the other farmers who you've been propped up by the federal government. And now that U.S. aid, since a lot of these farmers in the Midwest, a huge portion of your profit. Some of them were exclusively contracted with USAID. So everything you grew was already purchased in advance by USAID because you had grants and contracts. So he crippled y'all. And I hear people say, well, all these farmers are dumb. No, these farmers are not dumb. Farming is not an easy task. They're not dumb. I'm thinking hateful, where you're voting for hate instead of intelligence, because how does somebody who has contracts with the federal government vote for a man that says he wants to kneecap the federal government? That don't make no sense. Like, did you not read the policies? But a lot of people don't. And that's regardless of party. If enough people say it, you can repeat a lie 10 times, somebody will start believing it. If somebody they trust or like says something, they start believing it. And everyone has resources to where you could research yourself, read the policies, look them up. If you don't understand them, ask AI. You don't got to take my word or somebody else's word. I've always been taught when I was growing up, double check and triple check things you hear. It don't mean what you're hearing is wrong, but you would be being selfish and doing yourself a disservice to not fact check. I've been told things that seemed like they were decent. They might have sounded right, but at the end of the day, they weren't. And that's okay, but you can't form thoughts for yourself, and a lot of people don't want to. They're going to go along with the masses, even if they don't agree, because they don't want to stand alone. Socially, you want to be with the in crowd. And that's what this has done right now, where you got all these people that are now trying to change your mind about the way immigration is going, except you're devout hate mongers. But you got a lot of people now because they're seeing the impact now. They're seeing that nobody wants these jobs. And are you going to want to pay $9 for a gallon of milk? I'm listening to these crybaby farmers talking about how 100% of their workforce didn't show up and they didn't vote for this. Yes, you did. Yes, you did vote for this. Because everybody with half a brain knew his idea of making America great again is making America as white as possible. And he wanted to get all the Hispanics and Latinos out of here because he expected us to get back out there where we belong in his mind. I said this 18 months ago when he was talking about and going to black churches and shucking and jiving, and these idiots was out there praising him and clapping for Trump when he was saying these immigrants are taking black jobs. I said this 18 months ago. They didn't hear the words. They want to clap and shuck and jive and go Uncle Ruckus on everybody. Nah, I said it 18 months ago that listen to what he's saying. Some of y'all hear him, but y'all ain't listening. He specifically said that they were taking black jobs. He didn't say they were taking American jobs. He specifically said black jobs. And the immediate thought that I had, which even some of my friends, when I talked to them and all that, they weren't even on that same level. They weren't thinking about it. They just he's a bastard, and that's all. Anything he say, they don't like. So when he said taking black jobs, that's because he thinks we belong out in the fields. We belong out in all the manual labor jobs, getting paid nothing. We were supposed to be their replacements. That's what he meant by they're taking black jobs. Because he could have said they taking American jobs, but that ain't what he thinking. And that's not what that MAGA movement's about. That shit is white nationalism to the fullest. And they can say all this lame stuff about economy and all of this other stuff. That's the root of it. So even people that don't consider themselves racist or any of that other junk, they with that movement. Be honest with yourself. If you're going to be a monkey, be a gorilla. Because the economy, the majority of his base is broke as hell. So his tax policies were never going to help you. The man said out his own lips, because that's the most damning stuff you can get about Trump. You don't need to talk about fake news or whether they lean left or they lean right or they kind of in the middle. Listen to this man out of his own mouth. Nobody makes the argument against Trump better than him speaking. If his mouth is running, he lying. But the man is so cocky and such a scumbag that's always been able to do whatever he wants and violate and oppress and take advantage of people his whole life because his dad had money. He's always been rich. He just diarrhea at the mouth. So the man says so many things that if you listen to him, when he told everybody that rich people shouldn't pay taxes because they're job creators, all rich people got people working for them, so they should have to pay taxes. Who is left to pay taxes, you idiots who say, I picked him for the economy? Who's left? If we take out the rich 1% wealthy people, who's left? The middle class and the poor. And based on current tax codes, the poor don't make enough money to even have to pay income taxes. So who's left? All you so-called hard-working Americans and blue-collar workers, you're the only ones left that got to shelter the burden of paying for the country. So don't tell me you picked them for the economy. Because you're either stupid as hell, which honestly, a lot of people are not as intelligent as they should be, to put it mildly. Because I'm still hearing people talk about China gonna pay the tariffs and all that, where you don't understand what a tariff is and how they're talking about the tariffs that have been issued out and how much money the country's bringing in every month. The country's bringing in tariff money, but those businesses that are paying the tariffs, they've already increased prices on people. So all you did was shift costs to the consumers, because if a company pays more, you buy in the product for more from the company. Not to mention, if the Supreme Court could get a backbone and actually follow the law instead of being scary ass punks, the implementation of tariffs by orange face is illegal. The way he did it is illegal. You didn't go through Congress or the Senate. And you really screwed up when you told him, when that injunction came out, that you will refund everybody's tariffs if they don't rule in your favor. So unless they're cowards, which you can't trust the Supreme Court, they're a bunch of dirtbags with no backbone. So if they rule by the letter of law, which they haven't been doing, they've been making up their own shit, he's gonna have to refund all these tariffs because you didn't get Congress or Senate approval. So then you didn't make any money. You just screwed up the economy for nothing, which it's all been a money grab anyway. You know, all this has been is market manipulation so that you can get richer and all your cronies can get richer. You've showed countries that I'm gonna do this 8 times as bad as I did the first time around, and that the country's for sale if you personally enrich me. You look at Qatar, in addition to the plane and the $2 billion investment that you got in your crypto, now they can get chips and some of the electronic hardware that you declared them not able to get. There was a lot of products that you told these countries they couldn't have because Qatar had always been known as a state-sponsored terrorist place, that you were funding a lot of terrorist organizations throughout. But all you gotta do is throw a $400 million plane and $2 billion in crypto at them, and you back in the game. And there's endless deals that he's created with countries that y'all supposed to be on a terrorist watch list. Or at least you're a financial sponsor of known terrorist groups. But everything is more than just meets the eye. You offering $1,000 a head for immigrants to your bounty hunters and deputized people. You're offering all kinds of kickbacks to these hedge fund and business people to build new facilities to house these people. It's just like the criminal justice system. Once you put prisons on the stock market, that created an additional interest to keep them full. The higher the population, the more these places generate. And now that the Supreme Court has allowed you to deport people to not their countries of origin, that's a business transaction right there, where you're now going to pay other countries to take these people, and they're willing to take them because you're going to pay them millions of dollars. So they're building new facilities so you can send people there. You want to send them out instead of giving them their day in court? Like, that's some low down shit where you're calling people to show up for they've kept every appointment that they've needed to have throughout the immigration process. They're going through it with the trust that justice will be served, or at least they'll have a fair day in court. And you calling these people up, telling them to show up to these appointments, and then tackling them and arresting them and detaining them. You have people that are in session, go to the bathroom, and ICE is waiting for you or going in the bathroom to get you. What I'd rather you see, since ICE is going bankrupt with all these operations, I would have rather see the government hire more judges to adjudicate these cases. Hire more judges so that you're not sitting on a list for 3 to 5 years. Get these things done. Find out if you're legitimately here for refugee status or whatever, and then make a decision. If there's a deportation order, I understand why you would issue an order and let people go to get stuff in order and then get out. Okay, issue these orders, give them an ankle bracelet, and settle your business. Because there are, like I said, there's situations where people have done all the right stuff. You showed up at the border, presented yourself, expected to get due process. You're in the middle of due process, and they just snatching you up. Don't even care if you got immigration dates pending, if you at court to handle an immigration issue. That's ridiculous. But, you got to be honest with the situation where there are people that you've already had you went to court, you lost, and there's been a removal order. So what if it was in 97 or 2002? That you broke the law. And once you had your day in court, you didn't leave and you continued to break the law. Now, it sucks that after they had a removal order, you got married, had a bunch of kids here, and now they're tearing up the family. But there's a responsibility that you got to where you put your family in this situation. That's where I really couldn't argue with DACA. I heard a lot of people that were talking all kind of smack about DACA where they didn't like that, but when adults bring kids over here illegally, the kid didn't have no say-so. The victim in that is the child. When you're with adults who are making the decisions they're making. Because there are genuinely some horrible situations going on in the world where these people are seriously fleeing with legitimate refugee status where you're in danger. And there's a lot that you just want to come over here because you know there's opportunity. And I can't knock that. That's how the Europeans ended up here. And you stole everything that you touched when you got over here. So, the idea of immigration for a better opportunity, the Europeans should know that the best. Because you came over here to prosper. You came over here and stole everything and did what you did here because you wanted a better opportunity. It's just, you had the means to do it. So outside of who you killed with your hands and weapons of war, you killed 10 times that with disease you brought from Europe that was never seen on the North American continent. You brought filth and disease. Nonetheless, you stole all this shit, so how are you, your whole basis of you being here, y'all are immigrants. And y'all gonna act like you acting right now? Criminals, yes. People who went through the process at court and you still didn't leave, I can't argue that. But everyday citizens that, when it benefited you back in 2020, they were all essential workers. Construction and agricultural, they were essential workers. Government declared them with the Trump administration. There should be a path. But there's a lot of stuff that should be going different than it is, and it's not. I'm seeing these cases where they show the dad with the 3 veteran kids from the military. That's a sad story. But Pops is here illegally, and you happen to get caught. So when you've been here 20 or 30 years, you didn't take no steps to try to get legalized? So there's the emotional part about it, and then there's the intellectual part about it where I'm not heartless. But my biggest problem is the way you're going about doing it. It's inhumane. You're denying them due process. And if you follow the written laws of this country and equally protected people under the law and equally implied the law to everyone, illegal is illegal. So stop going after one group of ethnicity, or stop going after just brown people. Start going after them in Republican places. Start going after them in Boston, where you got a huge amount of Irish that's illegal. Go after them all throughout the East Coast where you got a lot of Eastern Europeans that are there illegally. Go after people from Asia. Go after everybody with the might that you targeting people here. And then start arresting these business owners who've been lying and cheating the federal government by filling out fake I-9s, hiring these people. Stop acting like y'all do when y'all police prostitution. Where y'all arrest the ladies but let the Johns go. They ain't got no customers. They ain't got no working girls. So if you started forcing stuff on these businesses that are exploiting this labor and everything, that would do a huge amount of difference in solving a lot of this immigration issue. They know there's work, so they come here because they know there's work. And they will work hard. That's one thing, that is not a lazy group of people. They're doing hard, back-breaking work that, frankly, U.S. citizens ain't trying to do. So your eyes and your ears don't lie, we out.